Anime, am I actually the strongest? In this first episode, we are introduced to a man who has isolated himself in his house for 5 years since junior high school. He did this to avoid bullying. One day, his phone shines brightly, and when he regains consciousness, he is greeted by a goddess. The goddess tells him that he has been chosen to be reincarnated. He will live in a world full of magic. Because of that, the goddess gives him cheats so that his life won't be difficult. The man agrees to be reincarnated. He wants to live a peaceful life. To relax all day without thinking about anything and live lazily, then suddenly fall asleep. When he wakes up in the other world, he realizes that he is in the body of a newborn baby. He still retains memories from his previous life. His father is a king of a kingdom, and his mother, known as the Lightning Princess, once defeated the Demon King. The baby has the mark of the king on his left chest. They are very proud of their child. After that, they want to measure the baby's magical energy. The king has high expectations because the child is the offspring of the Lightning Princess. A number appears on the magic measuring crystal, and they are shocked because the baby's magical energy is only level 2. Furthermore, the baby doesn't have any attributes and can only master defensive magic. Both parents are worried that their reputation will be ruined when the people find out about their child's existence. They decide to spread a rumor that the newborn Prince Reinhardt was actually born stillborn. The king orders his servants to throw Reinhardt deep into the forest. The goddess who reincarnated him panics when she sees this. She forgot that the magic energy measuring device in that world can only display up to 2 digits. Moreover, she forgot to add attributes to him. In fact, the goddess had given him a cheat so that his magical energy level was 1002. Reinhardt is currently alone in the forest. He cannot move freely because he is still a baby. He wants to try magic since he was told earlier that he could use defensive magic. He imagines it and easily creates a cube-shaped shield. He can enlarge and change the color of the shield. It seems like he can create anything just by imagining it. After trying it, he realizes that his defensive magic can be used on himself. Reinhardt appears as if he is floating, even though there is a shield carrying him. Soon, a giant red fox ambushes Reinhardt. Luckily, his shield is sturdy enough to withstand the fox's bite. He creates many small shields to attack the fox. However, his attacks have little effect. Then, he comes up with the idea of lifting the trees around him with his shield. Finally, his attacks have an impact on the fox. Unfortunately, that was still not enough to defeat it. Reinhardt decided to fly the large trees along with the earth beneath them. When the fox saw this, it suddenly spoke and said that it wanted to surrender. Reinhardt thought that the voice was just his imagination. The fox pleaded once again to surrender. Reinhardt finally realized that the voice was coming from the fox. He stopped his attack. The fox then explained that it wanted to eat Reinhardt to restore its magical energy. It never expected that a baby could be this strong. Reinhardt wanted to say something, but he couldn't form coherent sentences because he was still a baby. He had the idea to create a shield that could transform his thoughts into words. He attached the shield to his throat. And indeed, he could now speak normally. Feeling that his name was too long and difficult to pronounce, he introduced himself as Heart. He explained that he was abandoned after birth because his magical energy was too low. The fox couldn't believe that he was discarded just like that. After all, the fox sensed magical energy within Heart that surpassed that of humans. The fox suspected that Heart was the reincarnation of the Demon King. Heart admitted this because he didn't want to be seen as a loser. Moreover, he used to be an unemployed shut-in. The fox immediately believed him. The fox offered itself to be killed because it had lost the fight. Heart felt uncomfortable with the idea of killing it. He forgave the fox as long as it wouldn't attack him again in the future. The fox vowed to keep that promise in the name of the Flame Fenrir race. Finding the name of the race cumbersome, Heart called the fox Flay. Heart asked for permission to leave now that their problem was resolved. However, Flay didn't want to say goodbye first. Heart had saved it and even given it a new name. When that happened, a contract was formed. Therefore, it was only fitting for a servant to dedicate itself to its master. While Flay was still talking, Heart suddenly felt weak and couldn't fly with his shield anymore. It seemed that this problem wouldn't be solved with magic alone. Indeed, Heart needed breast milk. For the sake of his master, Flay would do its best. It began to transform into a human. However, Flay still couldn't produce breast milk. It needed to go through the reproductive process first. They were still helpless and couldn't do anything. At that moment, Flay sensed someone approaching. Heart commanded Flay to check on the person, and Heart created a shield that allowed them to communicate privately over a distance. When asked, the man who came said that he wanted to pick up the baby behind Flay. Flay immediately refused. It didn't want to hand over Heart, who had just become its master. However, the man said that the baby was his relative. He knew that the baby was abandoned for a reason, so he came to save it. Furthermore, Heart looked hungry. The man had brought breast milk in a bag for the baby. Heart asked Flay to retrieve the breast milk. However, Flay insisted on maintaining its dignity by taking care of Heart alone. The man revealed that he couldn't bear to see a young child in distress. When his ex-wife was pregnant, their baby didn't cry when it was born. That's why he wanted Heart to continue living after birth. The man then persuaded Flay with a deal. If Flay wanted Heart to be its master, Flay had to work as the man's servant. After hearing the story and agreement from the man, Flay finally agreed. Then, the man destroyed Heart's baby basket and replaced the cloth that Heart was wrapped in. This was done to create camouflage. 9 years have passed, and now Heart is accustomed to living with his new family. The man who picked him up turned out to be a count named Gordo. Gordo has a daughter from his new wife. Her name is Charlotte, commonly known as Char, a young blonde girl. It seems that Char is not very fond of interacting with Heart. On the other hand, Char seems to be very fond of Flay. However, Flay still prioritizes Heart as its servant. In fact, Flay will only play with Char if ordered by Heart first. While the two of them play, Heart watches from a distance. Then, his stepmother, Natalia, approaches him. She knows that Heart is thinking about his relationship with Char. However, according to Natalia, Char avoids Heart because she doesn't know how to behave around someone of the opposite sex who is the same age. That's why Char can be very close to Flay, who is the same gender. Natalia suggests that Heart do something to make Char happy. Perhaps Char's perception will change if Heart shows his role as an older brother. Despite being asked to do so, Heart was just an unemployed person with communication problems. He felt incapable of undertaking such a difficult task. Afterward, Heart was contemplating his life plan while lying on the bed. Actually, Heart wanted to live independently. However, Flay would surely continue to follow him. Plus, Char might grow to hate him even more. On the other hand, if he continued to live in this residence, Heart would have to do many things. Either way, Heart can now create clones of himself using defensive magic. During these 9 years, he has conducted extensive research on defensive magic. Unfortunately, his clone still cannot speak or move. While still pondering his life issues, Gordo knocks on his door. He invites Heart to teach him sword techniques. Since Heart's magic level is very low, Gordo wants to develop Heart's skills in other areas. They begin training with a wooden sword. In his lifetime, Gordo was known as the Earth Crusher Hammer, a formidable warrior. Since Heart didn't want to feel pain, he covered his body with defensive magic. Heart immediately leaps and swings his sword. Although Gordo can dodge it, he seems surprised by the attack. Moreover, Heart's wooden sword breaks when it touches the ground. Now it's Gordo's turn to attack. As the sword is about to hit him, Heart manages to dodge perfectly by leaping high into the air. In fact, that attack could only be avoided if someone had magic energy at level 30 or higher. Since then, Heart has always been amazed by his abilities. In the past, he even created his own magic level measuring crystal that could measure up to 3 digits. He suspected that maybe his magic level reached 3 digits, but when measured, the result remained the same, 002. Heart immediately gave up when he saw the result. Besides, it was said that the highest magic level in human history was 77. So, Heart felt it was pointless to test it to 4 digits. In his opinion, the cheat he received from the goddess was the ability to use defensive magic with high efficiency. Meanwhile, Char watches Heart's sword training from a distance. In the evening, Gordo tells Natalia about the earlier incident. Char is sleeping on her mother's lap. According to Gordo's opinion, Heart is a newly awakened demon race. Based on the family's secret information, someone in the past had a connection with creatures from the demon race. There is a possibility that Hart was born with those characteristics. It is true that Hart doesn't have horns and a tail, but the royal symbol he possesses remains a mystery. In fact, even Flay, who is a demon race, idolizes Hart. However, Natalia cannot bear to think of Hart as a demon race. Gordo also still considers Hart as a human. He wants to bring happiness to their children. Meanwhile, Flay has been listening to their conversation. It also objects to the idea that its older sibling is a demon race. This is the end of episode 1. Continuing to episode 2, Hart was relaxing on his bed. Lately, Gordo seemed busy, so he didn't need to practice sword techniques. Suddenly, Hart heard a commotion outside. He tried to see the situation outside using his protective magic projection. Near the fortress gate, many of his father's soldiers were severely injured. Gordo himself was fine but felt very frustrated. Hart went there and met his father. Gordo said he had been busy lately because there had been frequent bandit attacks in the area. After obtaining the information, Gordo and his troops headed to the bandits' headquarters. However, their troops were suddenly attacked from behind. Despite being alert and fully prepared, they were taken by surprise. Hart's face turned angry upon hearing Gordo's story. Flay was also there, mocking the soldiers for losing to lowly bandits. Hart immediately told her to be quiet, and Flay backed off. While walking towards his residence, Hart secretly predicted protective magic that could heal wounds. The soldiers were puzzled as to why their injuries healed on their own. That night, Hart was already asleep in his bed, and for some reason, Flay was still standing in front of his room door. When Hart woke up and wanted to leave the room, he was surprised to see Flay there. Even when asked, Flay didn't say anything. Hart remembered that earlier he had ordered Flay to stay quiet because he was angry. Perhaps that's why Flay was acting this way. Hart felt guilty and allowed Flay to speak again. After that, Hart wanted to go out tonight, and he asked Flay to accompany him. Hart used his projection to search for the bandits who attacked his father's soldiers. Hart found a group of bandits, but among them, he saw some soldiers as well. Hart and Flay suspected that the enemy had information about Gordo's troops. In other words, they had spies. Without much thought, Hart decided to eliminate them completely. From inside the residence, Hart and Flay were unaware that Char was looking out the window. Meanwhile, at the bandits' headquarters, it turned out there were indeed some soldiers who had betrayed their own side. They were pleased to see Gordo running away from the battle. Their next plan was to eliminate Gordo. Unbeknownst to them, Hart and Flay overheard their conversation. They panicked because there was a sudden intruder. As they tried to draw their weapons, Hart immobilized them with his protective magic. Hart intended to interrogate them, and it seemed they had no other choice after witnessing his terrifying face and abilities. Hart obtained some interesting information. The bandits who attacked were actually Imperial soldiers from a neighboring country in disguise. They infiltrated the kingdom to create chaos. They claimed to have an accomplice who helped them overcome the border security. However, they themselves didn't know much about this accomplice. Hart was surprised because such a thing could only be done with authority surpassing that of Gordo. It could be that someone in this kingdom was targeting Gordo's life. After answering Hart's questions, the spies pleaded for forgiveness and promised not to be involved in this matter again. However, Hart instructed Flay to burn down their entire headquarters instead. And so, the fortress they used as their base turned into a sea of fire. For now, Hart planned to inform Gordo about this information through an anonymous letter. The next day, Gordo received the anonymous letter. Gordo's troops confirmed that the mentioned fortress had been completely burned down, and they also managed to capture some bandits at the location. Initially, Gordo suspected that they were not ordinary bandits, but he didn't expect them to be involved with the Empire. Char was also with Gordo and heard all the news. Char asked who had exterminated those wicked people. It was not certain, but considering the skill and brutality displayed, only one person came to mind when it came to discussing powerful fire magic. Who else but Flay? Gordo even admitted that Flay had abilities surpassing his own. Sometimes, Flay also patrolled to control the demon race in this area. Gordo speculated that Flay coincidentally encountered the bandits while on patrol. Char immediately remembered something and asked for permission to leave. Char wanted to find out more about her sibling. She went straight to Flay to inquire. She wanted to know if there were two of her siblings. Char recounted that last night she saw shadows that looked like Heart and Flay flying in the middle of the night. However, Char was certain that her sibling couldn't use flying magic. Therefore, Char decided to go to her sibling's room to make sure. There, she found her sibling sleeping, but Char didn't sense the usual frightening aura. Flay instantly felt proud of her master's power. She explained that the intimidating aura was evidence of Heart's extraordinary magical strength. Since infancy, his power had been incredibly formidable. Even as a demon, Flay couldn't reach that level. Char then asked about Heart's true identity. However, Flay didn't want to tell her. Although when Heart once claimed to be the Demon King, he was just speaking casually at that time. In the afternoon, Flay told Heart about her conversation with Char. They spoke telepathically using protective magic to avoid being overheard by others. Heart decided to create a surveillance spell. He also set it up to emit a warning sound whenever Char was in a certain location or engaged in something dangerous. At night, Heart intentionally left his room to lure Char. He pretended to go to the bathroom. Char followed Heart from behind at a not too distant distance. Then, Heart gathered his courage to turn around and ask her something. Char immediately ran and hid again. Even while bathing, Heart didn't suspect that his sister was secretly spying on him, although in reality, Char was clearly visible. The following day was the same. Char continued to follow and observe Heart from behind. Even when he practiced swordsmanship, read books, bathed with Gordo, and during all his other activities. This went on for 7 days. Then, during a family meal, Gordo informed them that Natalia and Char would be going out. They were going to attend an annual festival. Usually, Gordo would accompany them, but this time he asked the two of them to go instead. Meanwhile, Char continued to gaze at Heart. In the afternoon, Heart received a warning sound from the surveillance spell he had placed on Char. In the forest, Natalia and Char were ambushed by a group of bandits. The guards were overwhelmed trying to fend off the bandits. Natalia managed to find an opportunity to escape. She carried Char with her. Suddenly, a protective magic appeared in Char's ear, indicating the direction to flee. Natalia herself was puzzled about how someone could give instructions to Char. Natalia reached the edge of a cliff, and Char said there was a hiding place below. Reluctantly, Natalia had to jump down to avoid being captured by the bandits. Fortunately, Natalia used her magic to minimize the impact of the fall. They finally arrived in a dark cave. Natalia said she wanted to meet the person who had given Char instructions. Although she didn't know the person's identity, Natalia believed they were a defender of truth. Char asked what a defender of truth was. Natalia explained that this figure was someone who punished criminals. Natalia intended to go outside and told Char to stay there. As she left, the mouth of the hiding place suddenly vanished and turned into a stone. However, she could still pass through the stone. It seemed to be an illusion spell. Unaware that the bandits had managed to find her, Natalia was not going to allow herself to become their captive. She unsheathed the knife she had and aimed it at her own throat. She felt it was better to die than to be a prisoner. Suddenly, the knife Natalia held shattered into pieces. It was actually Heart's doing. He also made Natalia temporarily unconscious to prevent her from being discovered. Witnessing all of this, Heart became incredibly angry. He unleashed his wrath upon all the bandits in front of him. After successfully securing their mother, Heart brought her inside the cave. He altered his voice to sound like someone else, but Char couldn't be fooled. She felt the intimidating aura emanating from him, similar to Heart's aura. Char gathered the courage to turn around and call out to her brother. Surprisingly, Heart spontaneously responded when she called out to him. Char asked if he was the defender of truth who punished evil people. Heart didn't know how to answer, so he went along with it for now. He confessed that he was indeed a defender of truth. Char became excited upon hearing this and felt guilty for misunderstanding her brother all this time. Heart only asked her to keep it a secret for now. After that, Heart bid farewell and went outside to take care of the remaining enemies. Later that night, Heart returned home early and instructed Flay to pick up Natalia and Char, so they wouldn't suspect that he was the one who saved them. Gordo's subordinates also reported that the injured guards miraculously healed themselves. Just like the other day, Gordo wanted to express his gratitude to the person who helped him, but he had no idea about their identity. Heart mentioned that the person would surely come again when the Imperial soldiers disguised as bandits returned. Gordo immediately asked how Heart knew that the bandits were actually Imperial soldiers. Heart made up a reason, saying that it was the most likely scenario if they were targeting Natalia and Char. A while later, Flay returned with Natalia and Char. Unexpectedly, Char suddenly hugged Hart with joy. Gordo and Natalia were also surprised to see them becoming close all of a sudden. Char simply stated that she had fallen in love with her brother. Flay felt jealous seeing someone else getting close to Hart. This is the end of episode 2. Continuing to episode 3, Char casually entered Hart's room and invited him to play. Hart asked her to knock on the door next time she wanted to come in. Char happily agreed and hugged her older brother. Since that day, Charlotte played in Hart's room every day. Hart didn't mind at all. In fact, he felt comforted by being able to caress Char, who was like a small animal. Char was curious about the visible projection in Hart's room. Hart explained that it was magic for surveillance. Char immediately referred to it as ancient magic because a while ago Hart mentioned that he was researching ancient magic in his room. Hart pretended to say that this magic was a bit troublesome because there was no documentation on ancient magic. However, to his surprise, Char said that there was actually documentation. She had seen it in the castle library. When they arrived at the library, Hart was very impressed with the number of books there, especially since it was his first time coming here. After that, Char fetched a book about ancient magic that she had seen. In one of the books, it was explained that ancient magic was non-elemental magic. Modern magic complements it by adding 4 elements. Hart suspected that perhaps his protective magic had similarities to ancient magic. Although there were many explanations about ancient magic, according to Char, this book was the most interesting among all. Hart didn't expect that Char had read this book, even though there were many difficult vocabulary words in it. Apparently, she read it with the help of her mother and Flay. Suddenly, Char sat on Hart's lap. She said that her mother and Flay also held her while reading the book. When reading the book more deeply, she felt that the development of the story was similar to an anime. Char became curious about the anime that her brother mentioned. Hart found it difficult to explain all the details, but in essence, anime is a moving picture, even with sound. Thanks to Hart's explanation, Char became interested in anime and wanted to watch it too. Honestly, Hart also wanted to see it, but he didn't know how. However, when he saw Char so excited, he tried to find a way for them to watch anime. 2 weeks later, the plan succeeded. The explanation was too complicated, but the important thing was that Hart could now access modern Japanese internet connection. Even the streaming subscription he bought before was still active. Hart just needed to create a special account for children so that Char could watch. After that, Char looked at the list of available anime and immediately became interested in an anime titled Emotional. From the thumbnail, the anime depicted a cute magical girl. As the anime played, Char was truly captivated by the moving and sound-filled images. However, Char encountered one problem. She couldn't understand the character's speech. Well, it was understandable because it was in Japanese. Char pleaded to be taught the Japanese language. Hart felt that it would be difficult, but he believed that Char had good absorption abilities since she was only 5 years old. And indeed, Char quickly mastered hiragana and katakana within 2 hours. She even started learning kanji for elementary school level and typed them into the search engine. 2 weeks later, as usual, Char entered Hart's room. This time, she wanted to watch the continuation of Tamazom. Char loved the story. The zombies were taking over Saitama City, and the justice heroes would protect the citizens. For the past 2 weeks, Char had been learning Japanese from anime and had grasped the basics. It was truly amazing, but Hart couldn't let her sister watch anime all the time. Just when Char wanted to watch the next episode, Hart advised her that binge-watching an entire season was not good. From now on, Hart limited Char to only watch 3 hours a day. Char was naturally disappointed. Despite that, Hart had to remain firm. He then invited Char to go out for dinner. During dinner, Char appeared sleepy and didn't eat her food at all. Gordo became curious because lately Char had been spending a lot of time with Hart. Char suddenly snapped out of her drowsiness and answered that they were studying ancient magic. After finishing dinner, Char continued to follow Hart, hoping to be allowed to watch anime. However, Hart still didn't give in and told her to take a bath and go to bed immediately. While Hart was taking a bath, Char actually entered the bathing area as well. Since she couldn't watch anime, Char had no choice but to go to sleep. By the way, Char had already told her mother that she would be taking a bath with her brother. Hart didn't mind because Char was still a young child, but deep down, he still felt like a criminal. Somehow, Char kept staring at Hart's body. It turned out she was curious about the mark on Hart's left chest. Char believed that it was the symbol of a justice hero. Heart simply pretended to confirm her statement, attributing it to her excessive anime watching. Afterward, they went to sleep and separated from each other. Despite the separation, Char suddenly ended up sleeping next to Heart. It seemed that Natalia had escorted Char as per her request, and she was even peeking from outside. She said her dream would come true by witnessing the closeness between Heart and Char. The next day, Gordo and his troops were about to go out to eliminate the bandits. Char appeared worried seeing her father's departure. She still seemed concerned when in Heart's room. However, Heart assured her that her father would be fine because these bandits were just ordinary ones. Lately, many ordinary people had turned into bandits due to power struggles within the country. Char wondered if there was no way for everyone to live happily. Heart explained that it was very difficult, even though everyone wished for it. Char then asked if her brother couldn't solve this problem. According to Char, Heart's power existed to handle such matters. It was unclear from which anime Char learned that sentence. Heart couldn't bear to see his little sister pleading with such adorable and pitiful eyes. It didn't stop there. Char wanted to see Heart transform before fighting. Reluctantly, Heart complied with her request. He posed as he did in the anime and changed his appearance. Heart wore all black clothing, with a cloak and helmet to conceal his identity. He also modified his voice so that he wouldn't be recognized by others. After that, Heart created a projection so that Char could watch him in action. Moreover, Heart couldn't take Char directly to the scene. After some time, Heart finally found the bandits. He blocked off the cave where they were hiding with protective magic. Upon arriving, Heart released his protective magic. Although embarrassed, Heart posed first before disposing of the bandits. When he had defeated all of them, Gordo and his troops arrived. Gordo asked who the person was that had defeated the bandits. Heart was puzzled about how to respond and accidentally blurted out Madani, still no one. Gordo then asked if this Madani was the one who had saved his wife and child. Heart pretended not to remember the incident, but his goal was clear, to uphold justice. Of course, Heart felt extremely embarrassed when he said it. He immediately flew away from them. When he arrived back in his room, Heart felt like he wanted to die from embarrassment. Because Char wanted to see Heart's actions again, he eventually gave in and continued to do it repeatedly. In fact, he now earned the nickname Black Knight. A few days later, Heart appeared very happy in his room. It turns out he had successfully perfected his clone. Since he was shown references to ancient magic, Heart had been trying to perfect his clone using that information. The clone resembled him so much that Heart himself felt annoyed. With this, his desire to seclude himself in his room was finally realized. Unbeknownst to Heart, Char had actually slept in his room overnight. And when Char woke up, she was clearly confused to see two of her brother. When Flay asked Heart to come out and greet the guests, Heart instructed his clone to go instead. However, because their personalities were too similar, the clone was also too lazy to leave. The guests who came to their residence were Princess Marianne and Prince Lias. They claimed to be heirs to the throne, which possibly made them Heart's siblings. Nevertheless, Prince Lias had a haughty demeanor. Princess Marianne continued to apologize for Lias' behavior. Heart himself was also surprised by his actions. Lias noticed that Heart was glaring at him. He had heard rumors that Heart was a level 2 child adopted from an orphanage. Lias challenged Heart to a duel to teach him proper etiquette towards the royal family. The duel was actually carried out. Since Lias seemed very confident, Heart wanted to see his level. Lias' current level was 9 and could reach a maximum level of 40. At the same time, he also wanted to see Gordo and Marianne's levels. Gordo had reached level 32, while Marianne was at level 14 and could reach a maximum level of 33. When Lias swung his sword, Heart easily dodged it. However, Lias protested because he couldn't discipline Heart if he kept dodging. Heart followed the course of the game. He covered his body with protective magic and pretended to be in pain when attacked. Lias felt superior and pretended to tell Heart to counterattack. Since he was allowed, Heart quickly moved behind Lias and knocked him down. Marianne, who witnessed it, couldn't believe that Heart was only level 2. Gordo himself didn't know. Even Heart himself said he didn't know how it was possible. Unable to accept it, Lias cast a fireball towards Heart. However, Heart was able to handle it with his protective magic. From the perspective of others, it appeared as though Lias' magic was absorbed by something. Lias tried to cast it again multiple times, but the result remained the same. Afterward, Heart showed all the absorbed flames forming a tremendous blaze. Lias immediately gave up upon seeing it. Then, Marianne apologized for her brother's behavior. She also wanted to confirm if Hart was truly level 2. She just found out that the rumors about him being level 2 had spread throughout the town. She suspected that their biological parents were investigating him. However, Hart didn't believe they were the ones behind it. Besides, his parents had discarded him so easily. This is the end of episode 3. Continuing to episode 4, recently Char enjoys hunting bandits using her magic and instructs Hart to exterminate them. Suddenly, Flay arrives after hearing from Char that Hart often acts alone. It turns out Flay also wants to join in the action. Hearing this, Char becomes excited as she has seen in anime when a comrade comes to save the hero in dangerous situations. Hart feels pressured by Char and Flay to act accordingly. Unable to refuse anymore, he warns Flay not to show extreme scenes to Char before they set off. Upon arrival, the bandits are confused by the sound of people from the forest. Slowly revealing themselves, Hart introduces himself as the Black Knight in a very embarrassing pose. Mimicking her master, Flay introduces herself as the Red Soldier. The bandits are puzzled by their antics. Contrary to their promise, Flay immediately uses her fire magic to brutally attack the bandits. Hart even uses protective magic to shield the bandits from Flay's assault. Seeing her attack has no effect, Flay increases the intensity of her fire. Finally, Hart knocks Flay on the head to stop her from going overboard. He then orders her to go home while he deals with the rest alone. After returning home, Hart collapses from exhaustion after dealing with the stubborn Flay. Char is overjoyed to see both of them in action. Flay is reminded that her attack was blocked by something during the fight. She wants to fight with all her might to help her master. However, Hart doesn't want Flay to participate in action again. Unfortunately, Char also wants to see both of them in action together again. It seems Hart's wish to live as a reclusive unemployed person in his room will not be fulfilled for a while. Meanwhile, Lias is still upset about being humiliated by Hart during their sword duel. Lias heard that Hart is just a level 2 kid. His servant comes to discuss something with him. For tomorrow's inspection, the servant asks him to invite Charlotte. At first, Lias is unwilling to invite the child. However, after the servant firmly insists that it's for his own good, Lias finally agrees. On the other hand, Char returns to Hart's room after the dinner event. Earlier, Hart also attended the event, but it was his clone that went. Char brings luxurious food from the event for Hart. The clone is upset because the real Hart ordered him to attend the event and then enjoy the food without pressure. The clone can't take it anymore. He is always forced to do things he dislikes and immediately collapses after complaining like that. Char is worried about her brother's clone, as he seems to be in a bad state. However, Char still has to participate in the inspection tomorrow. Hart asks why Char is participating in the inspection. Char explains that she was invited by Prince Lias. After seeing his suffering clone, Hart reluctantly decides to carry out his activities on his own for the time being. At night, Hart wants to ensure that tomorrow will be safe if Char joins. He investigates the inspection route using projection magic. During this, he sees a group of robed individuals performing a ritual in the middle of the forest. Innocently, Hart approaches them and asks what they are doing. He mentions that he happened to pass by and will inquire with Count Gordo to confirm their activities. The people immediately mistake Hart for Count Gordo's subordinate and try to eliminate him. Hearing this, Hart suddenly decides not to show mercy to them. As usual, Hart defeats the enemies effortlessly. However, one person summons a group of night skeletons from the magic circle they created. Again, the skeletons prove no match for Hart's abilities. However, the defeated skeletons manage to rise again. Hart realizes that the fight will be endless if he doesn't come up with a plan. After attacking several times, Hart notices something shining within the skeletons, which he suspects to be their core. When the summoner orders the skeletons to attack again, they don't respond to his command. Instead, they turn to attack the summoner and the other robed individuals. Feeling cornered, the summoner calls forth a more powerful creature, a golem. The golem easily crushes the skeletons with its bare hands. Observing closely, Hart notices that the golem also has an object on its chest similar to the skeleton's core. Upon this realization, Hart starts attacking, aiming for the object on the golem's chest. The golem suddenly stops moving and then turns to attack the summoner, just like what happened with the skeletons. In fact, Hart was only trying to immobilize it with a protective magic spike, but it seems there was an unintended alteration in the spell. After that, Hart binds the robed individuals with the help of the skeleton army. He wants to interrogate their leader. When questioned, the leader refuses to answer any of Hart's questions. Hart suspects this is because he acted too familiar. Feeling insecure about his lack of social skills, Hart decides to bury the leader's subordinates alive if he doesn't want to talk. Unable to watch this, the leader finally reveals his identity. They are the Summoning Corps under direct command of the Queen. They plan to attack the convoy that will conduct the field inspection tomorrow using summoned creatures. Hart is taken aback. The Queen they refer to is, of course, the Queen of this country, his birth mother. In other words, their target is Charlotte Xenophus. Char is targeted because her talent is seen as surpassing the Queen's potential. If Gordo supports Char, the Queen fears that the kingdom will be divided. Previously, the Queen also attempted to involve the imperial troops from the neighboring country in her plans. However, having failed twice, the forces directly under the Queen's command, like the Summoning Corps, are now in charge. Hart is shocked to learn these surprising facts. It turns out that all this time, the imperial troops disguised as bandits to attack Gordo, Natalia, and Char were the Queen's doing. Hart starts to despise the Queen, especially since she abandoned him since birth. He will not forgive anyone who tries to harm the people he cares about, even if it's his own birth mother. The next day, Hart is on his way to the joint inspection with the others. Lias looks unhappy since earlier. Then, Char tells him that he doesn't need to be sad for losing to Hart because he never had a chance to win from the beginning. Instead, he should be proud of attempting a one-on-one fight. Marianne also adds to Char's encouragement. When Hart himself tries to calm Lias, it only makes Lias more irritated with Hart. Lias wonders why since Hart didn't use magic when using his sword. Hart casually replies that he just imagines himself being stronger. However, Hart finds it strange when Lias and Marianne seem surprised. After all, Gordo and the others were satisfied with his explanation. Based on Hart's explanation, Lias suspects that Hart is a risen demon. The term is used for descendants of a union between a demon and a human, sometimes exhibiting characteristics of the demon race. Risen demons do have extraordinary strength, but since Hart doesn't display demon-like features, Marianne doubts this conclusion. A little while later, they finally arrive at the inspection location. It's the first time Hart has seen a wheat field. Charlotte is so excited that she runs around the field. While Gordo is inspecting on his own, Hart approaches him to discuss something. Since Hart rarely approaches Gordo, he knows it must be something important. Then, Hart asks for Gordo's opinion if it turns out that the Queen is targeting Char's life. Coincidentally, last night Gordo received another letter from the Black Knight. According to the letter, Gordo and his troops went to the specified location and found the Queen's wizard lying there. Gordo had suspected that the Queen would be hostile towards him. However, he didn't expect her to target Char. Nevertheless, she is the Queen of this country, and they can't just interfere with her as they please. Hart wishes such a queen would disappear from the world. Gordo reminds him not to speak recklessly like that. In reality, the capital desperately needs the Queen right now. Despite the irony, the authority of the king has been long gone. Many nobles have been vying for the next throne. However, they haven't made a move so far because of the Queen's absolute presence. In other words, if the Queen were gone, a civil war would break out. Gordo tells a story from 2 years before Hart was born when the king formed an expedition force to defeat the Demon King. Among that force was Giselet, the current queen. Giselet managed to defeat the Demon King all by herself. She became a hero and was dubbed the Princess of Lightning by everyone. Later, with the support of the people, Giselet married the king. Hart never imagined that the queen was such a formidable person. Gordo explains that the situation could change if there's someone who can replace the queen's role. Hart then asks why Gordo doesn't become king himself. Gordo feels he's not talented in politics. However, he has a feeling that Char could do it. Unfortunately, she's still too young. At least, Gordo wants to wait until Char becomes an adult. He's confident that Char will grow into someone who can lead this kingdom. From this conversation, Hart understands that Gordo hopes he will protect Char. He will do it until Char becomes a great queen. With that, Hart can live peacefully and enjoy life as a shut and unemployed person. This is the end of episode 4. Continuing on to episode 5, Giselet's subordinates are facing her due to their failed plans. Giselet appears disappointed by her subordinates' repeated failures. They report that there's a man known as the Black Knight who wiped out a bandit group in Count Gordo's territory. They suspect that he's also the one responsible for decimating the Summoning Corps today. However, Giselet remains unsatisfied with this explanation. Her subordinates request another chance to rectify their mistakes. Nonetheless, Giselet suddenly throws the wine she's been drinking at them. She has given them 3 chances already. After all, she merely tasked them with killing a child. Giselette does acknowledge that Charlotte could become a threat to her in the future. Given the circumstances, Giselette decides to handle it on her own. She plans to wield the holy sword she possesses to defeat the Demon King. Suddenly, Giselette hears a mysterious sound in her throne room. Her subordinates are rendered unconscious with protective magic covering their heads. Of course, the perpetrator is Hart, who is currently disguised as the Black Knight. Giselette believed that her palace would have multiple layers of protection, making it impervious to infiltration. However, to Hart, these protections are nothing more than playthings he can easily break through. Giselette is confident in her ability to defeat him and teach him a lesson for disturbing her. Hart is quite surprised to see Giselette simultaneously invoking 3 magic circles. Firstly, Hart finds himself trapped within a water sphere, making it hard to breathe. Yet, he manages to escape by leaping using the protective layer he crafted on his feet. Secondly, Giselette unleashes a series of ice magic attacks, which Hart manages to deflect with his protective barriers. Finally, Giselette employs an immense fire magic. Hart seems not to dodge or deflect it, choosing to remain still. Following this, Hart is seen kneeling after being struck by her attack. At this point, Giselette believed she had won. However, Hart stood up again as if nothing had happened. In an instant, Hart launched an attack with his protective magic. While Giselette managed to deflect it, she had no idea what had struck her. She could only sense the shockwaves. Seeing that Giselette could still deflect his attack, Hart decided to get more serious. He unleashed a series of stronger consecutive attacks. Giselette struggled to withstand them all. She felt her magical energy would deplete before his. Even though she fought the Demon King, her strength wasn't as formidable as the Black Knight's. Nevertheless, Giselette didn't give up. She eventually drew her holy sword. Despite wielding her holy sword, they still seemed evenly matched. Giselette grew more fervent, declaring herself as the strongest in the world, unmatched in sword combat. Hart considered Giselette too weak for someone claiming to be the world's strongest. Subsequently, Hart swung his sword, causing Giselette's sword to be knocked away. Hart decided to punish Giselette by placing an iron collar around her neck. If the collar is forcibly removed, her neck will be severed. Hart then demanded that Giselette refrain from interfering with Count Gordo and his family again. He threatened her with harsher consequences if she violated this demand. With Giselette dealt with, he left the throne room. Outside, Flay was already waiting for him. Since that day, Giselette never bothered them again. 5 peaceful years have passed, and Hart is now almost 15 years old. In Count Gordo's region, the snow has started to fall. Hart, Char, and Flay are outside playing. Hart asks Flay if she's not feeling cold wearing her maid outfit as her daily attire. This outfit is the first clothing Hart gave her. Flay playfully claims she's not bothered, even though she's actually cold. Well, what can you do? Hart creates winter clothes for Flay to wear. Hart emphasizes that Flay should just let him know if she needs anything. Upon hearing this, Flay takes it quite literally and comes up with 10 requests. Of course, Hart declines. Unexpectedly, Char also has a request. She says she's prepared a finishing move related to the snow. Unfortunately, she can't execute it herself. Naturally, Char asks Hart to do it for her. As usual, Hart feels uneasy turning down Char's request. After being whispered to by Char, Hart starts performing the finishing move. He conjures a snow tornado in his hand, thanks to the assistance of his protective magic. Then, Hart strikes a pose and utters a line like a magician in an anime. He directs the snow tornado into the ground, creating a remarkably large hole. Despite feeling very embarrassed, everything feels worth it when he sees Char's happiness. Suddenly, Gordo and Natalia also arrive at the scene. They're surprised to find such a huge hole near them. Char panics at the thought of Hart's identity being exposed because of this. Then, Hart tries something. Using his protective magic, he creates the illusion of the Black Knight passing by coincidentally. Hart explains that the person wants to showcase his finishing move to them. With a resigned expression, Gordo simply accepts Hart's explanation. After that, Hart asked Gordo if there have been any worrying cases recently. Gordo mentioned that for the past 5 years, no one has targeted Charlotte anymore. He's unsure about what happened to the Queen. Rumor has it that Giselette hasn't appeared in public for several years now. There's speculation that she suddenly started wearing a necklace resembling that of a slave. Initially, people thought it was just the Queen's hobby, but there are also conspiracy theories suggesting that the Queen accidentally put it on and can't take it off. There's also a theory that someone deliberately put it on her. Hart was thankful for his peaceful days without any disturbances. With this, he believed he could live in seclusion wholeheartedly. He decided to head back to his room. However, Gordo suddenly told him that he must attend school in the capital starting from spring. Gordo tried to refuse, but the situation got complicated. He would explain the details later at their residence. Of course, even before anything, Hart rejected the idea. School is the place he despised the most from his previous life. If the situation was indeed complicated and couldn't be refused, Hart intended to break that situation. Upon arriving at their residence, Gordo once again explained that Hart had to attend school in the capital starting from spring. In the past, Hart had refused to attend school in this area. However, this time he couldn't decline simply because he didn't want to. Gordo presented a school recommendation letter directly from the king. Gordo also couldn't comprehend why the king chose Hart, but he suspected it had something to do with Princess Marianne. Since her visit for inspection, it seemed like Marianne had taken an interest in Hart. It was rumored that Lias would skip a grade and also enter that school. Nonetheless, Gordo remained worried. There's a possibility that the queen is planning something and involving Marianne. Given the situation, Hart finally agreed to attend school in the capital. Additionally, Gordo suggested that Hart bring a servant with him. After all, it's difficult to live alone in an unfamiliar place. Unfortunately, he couldn't bring Flay along. Suddenly, Natalia, who had been eavesdropping, volunteered to take care of Hart. The issue is, how can a student attend school with their parents? At least, there's still 3 months until school starts, so Hart can search for a servant by then. Even though he agreed to attend school, Hart still plans to lock himself in his room. He informs his clone about the school news. As his clone cannot use magic, Hart intends to have it expelled for not being proficient at school. In other words, his plan is to make it seem like the king has misjudged Hart's Xenophis. His clone protests why the real Hart himself wouldn't do it. Hart feels he would enjoy using his magic to deal with any troublesome students. The clone immediately starts whining, saying it doesn't want to attend school if it will be bullied by other students and unable to fight back. Seeing it behave this way, Hart decides to bestow his clone with protective magic to prevent it from getting hurt. With a somewhat heavy heart, the clone finally agrees to Hart's plan. Hart is currently at a wooden house beside a lake, a mountain's distance away from Gordo's castle. He built this house over the course of 5 years as his final retreat. There, no one can disturb him. Hart spends his time playing games on a console he built himself. Suddenly, Char, accompanied by Flay, also arrives at the house. Char is dressed in a costume resembling that of a witch girl. Apparently, she came here to watch the anime Mini Love Cure. While watching it, Char can perfectly mimic the poses and lines of the witch girl. Hart thought Char might be getting tired of the anime since she hasn't been coming to his room lately. However, Char seems to be getting even more into it. These past few days, Char has indeed been learning a lot. That's why she's forbidden to go to her brother's room. From an outsider's perspective, Char appears to be quite spoiled towards her brother. The only way for Char to watch the anime is to ask Flay to bring her here. Suddenly, Hart has the idea to use teleportation to arrive directly at this house. He tries to demonstrate his teleportation using a potato. Through one side of his protective magic, Hart inserts the potato until it teleports to the other side of his protective magic. He has mastered it, but he still hasn't tried teleporting living beings. Flay suggests experimenting with his clone. However, for Flay, Hart's clone is something she can take advantage of as much as she wants. Afterward, Hart incorporates teleportation into his protective magic in his room. He instructs his clone to walk through it. But the clone already knows it's being used as a test subject. Suddenly, Flay loses her temper because the clone won't obey. She jumps into the teleportation to drag Hart's clone into it. As can be seen, his protective magic teleportation can be used on living beings. Next, Hart creates a door that, when opened, will pass through his teleportation. Hart suddenly remembers something: he needs to find a servant. But as usual, he'll procrastinate it. This is the end of episode 5.
Hart is still lounging in his wooden house with Char and Flay. Then he suddenly remembers that he needs to find a butler to accompany him to school. Char and Flay are puzzled as they witness Hart suddenly shouting "Butler." Hart offers the excuse that he wants to take a walk. School is still 3 months away, but Hart has yet to find a suitable candidate. While walking through the forest, Hart recalls a path leading to a certain place. As he follows it, he comes across a village inhabited by many living skeletons. Lisa could still use its wings in human form, so it had no trouble keeping up with Hart. Meanwhile, Flay had to run as fast as she could to follow Hart from below.